Fernanda gave a shy smile, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I don't mean to sound ungrateful." "You're not being ungrateful," Pedro assured her, his voice steady and sincere. "You're just nervous. And if it makes you feel better to know, so am I." His confession caught her off guard, and her smile softened, genuine this time. The tension began to melt away as they settled into conversation, the evening flowing with surprising ease. By the time they finished dinner, Fernanda felt more comfortable, her earlier worries forgotten. When they arrived back at Fernanda's home, Pedro turned to her as she reached for the door handle. "Would it be all right if I asked you to go out with me again?" he asked, his voice low but hopeful. Fernanda paused, meeting his gaze with a mix of warmth and curiosity. "It would be a pleasure," she said simply. Pedro's chest eased, a quiet relief spreading through him. "Great. I'll let you know ahead of time." As Fernanda stepped out of the car, Pedro called after her, his voice carrying a hint of admiration. "Fernanda, I've never enjoyed a dinner as much as I did tonight." "Thank you." She turned back to him, her smile luminous under the soft glow of the streetlights. "Me too. Have a wonderful night, Pedro. I'll see you tomorrow morning with your breakfast." "I'll see you tomorrow," Pedro replied, his tone warm, a trace of contentment lingering in his voice. "Good night." "Good night," Fernanda said before closing the door. As Pedro drove away, her words echoed in his mind, filling him with a quiet sense of anticipation for the days to come. Marcia lounged in the grand living room, sipping her tea as she spoke to Selena, her tone carefully measured. "Mom, I wanted to let you know there's an emergency meeting with the hotel executives tomorrow morning." Selena raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "Do you know why they've called this meeting?" she asked, her voice calm but probing. Marcia shook her head, feigning ignorance. "I have no idea, Mom. I'm just passing along the information." At that moment, Pedro walked in, and Selena turned to him. "Pedro, we have an emergency meeting tomorrow morning in the conference room," she informed him. Pedro frowned slightly. "What's going on? Why the sudden meeting?" Before Selena could answer, Marcia interjected, a hint of mockery in her tone. "The meeting is just for Mom and the executives, Pedro. It doesn't concern you." Pedro's gaze lingered on Marcia for a moment before he nodded. "All right then. I'll see you both after the meeting." The next morning, Selena entered the conference room promptly at 9 a.m. The hotel executives were already seated, their faces a mix of nervousness and resolve. Marcia, to Selena's surprise, was sitting among them. "Good morning," Selena said, her voice firm as she surveyed the room. Her eyes landed on Marcia. "Marcia, I thought you told me yesterday this meeting was just for me and the executives. What are you doing here? And didn't you also say Pedro shouldn't attend? You may leave now." Marcia's face flushed slightly, but she quickly composed herself. With no choice but to comply, she rose from her chair and left the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Once the door closed behind her, Selena turned back to the executives. "Let's begin." The executives launched into their agenda, presenting their concerns about Pedro's role as head manager of the VIP department. They framed their arguments around his lack of experience, suggesting his decisions might pose risks to the Royal Hotel's long-term success. Selena listened intently, her face unreadable, until they finished speaking. When they were done, Selena stood, her commanding presence filling the room. "I've heard everything you had to say," she began, her voice steady but edged with authority. "If you're finished, I'd like to speak now." She stepped closer to the table, her gaze sweeping across the room. "I am the owner of this hotel. The final word on any matter here is mine. Let me make this clear, my son will not leave his position. If any of you are unhappy with his performance, you can let me know directly and I'll call HR immediately to handle your concerns. But before making such claims, perhaps you should have done your due diligence." Selena's tone sharpened, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Have any of you bothered to look at the financial reports? Have you reviewed how much the VIP restaurant has profited since Pedro became head manager? Or did you decide it was easier to focus on rumors and baseless accusations rather than facts?" She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "It seems to me that the issue here isn't Pedro. The problem lies with the executives in this room who are failing to do their jobs. None of you seem to have a grasp on the financial growth we've experienced under his management. And isn't financial gain supposed to be the primary concern of hotel executives? Or am I mistaken? The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down on the assembled executives. Selina remained standing, her authority undeniable, as she awaited their response. Selina's gaze swept across the room, her eyes lingering on each executive seated in the pristine meeting room. The silence was heavy, charged with the tension of unspoken thoughts. "Does anyone here wish to resign?" she asked, her voice crisp and commanding. "If so, let me know now, and I'll ensure your paperwork is prepared immediately." Not a single person stirred. The room remained still, save for the executive designated as the group's spokesperson. Clearing his throat, he finally spoke. "Mrs. Selina, the reason we reached this conclusion was due to what we perceive as unnecessary expenses under Pedro's leadership. Items such as new uniforms, tablecloths, and incentives for the concierges, all of which, in our opinion, were avoidable." He hesitated before continuing, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "However, you're right. We haven't reviewed the hotel's earnings for this month, nor do we have a clear picture of which sector has made the most profit. For that, we apologize. We acted prematurely." Selina's expression didn't soften. Instead, her voice grew sharper, cutting through his feeble explanation. "Do you even understand the purpose of incentives?" She paused, allowing her question to settle. "I doubt it, so let me explain. Incentives drive performance. They motivate our concierges to excel, encouraging them to upsell premium wines, whiskies, and other high-value items to our guests. And when they succeed, our profits increase significantly." Her gaze hardened as she continued. "The incentives we offer do not harm us. On the contrary, they elevate the quality of our service and improve the bottom line. Before you call an emergency meeting like this again, make sure you've considered the facts. Understand the results before jumping to conclusions." She straightened, her tone signaling the discussion was over. "This meeting is adjourned. Have a good day, everyone. Return to your work." As Selina left the meeting room, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her mind raced with unease. The executives' arguments lacked depth, and their reasoning felt rehearsed, as though they were parroting a script. The little that was said in this meeting felt too deliberate, Selina thought, her concern deepening. "There's more to this than what they're letting on. I need to find out who's really behind this." Pedro sat in his office, ostensibly immersed in his work, yet his thoughts kept drifting back to the dinner from the night before. The conversation, the quiet smiles, the way Fernanda had looked at him, all of it replayed in his mind. A knock at the door pulled him back to the present. "Come in," he called, his tone steady. The door opened, and there she was, Fernanda, impeccably professional as always. She entered with her usual grace, carrying his breakfast tray with the poise of someone who had mastered her craft. Despite their shared moment the previous evening, she gave no indication that anything had changed between them. Her demeanor was polished, her voice warm but formal. "Good morning, Mr. Pedro," she said, setting the tray on his table. "I hope you enjoy your breakfast. Have a great day." With that, she gave him a polite nod and left the room. Pedro watched her go, captivated once again by her elegance and restraint. He admired the respect she maintained for her role, the way she navigated their professional environment without a hint of impropriety. It only deepened his fascination with her. Shaking himself out of his reverie, Pedro turned his attention back to his work. He had plans brewing, innovations he wanted to bring to the Royal Hotel that would elevate its standing even further. This time, his thoughts turned to the underutilized spaces within the hotel. Vast, empty areas that could be transformed into something extraordinary. An idea began to form. Why not create high-end retail spaces? He thought. The Royal Hotel catered to guests with significant purchasing power, and luxury boutiques would not only enhance the hotel's appeal but also generate substantial revenue. Driven by this vision, Pedro left his office and walked the hotel floors, inspecting every unused corner and open space. He took careful note of the dimensions and locations, mentally mapping out how many upscale stores could fit into the available areas. Returning to his office, Pedro began reaching out to potential partners, luxury brands that matched the prestige of the Royal Hotel. Each call was strategic, each proposal meticulously crafted to attract the kind of businesses that would align with the hotel's image of sophistication and exclusivity. Pedro's excitement grew as his plans started taking shape. The idea of transforming dormant spaces into thriving hubs of luxury filled him with purpose. It was another step toward making the Royal Hotel not just a destination, but an experience that redefined elegance. Pedro spent the afternoon reaching out to some of the world's most prestigious luxury brands, Piaget, Tiffany & Company, Louis Vuitton, stores synonymous with high society and exclusivity. His proposals were met with intrigue, and while none gave an immediate commitment, each assured him they would study the possibilities and follow up. The thought of these esteemed names becoming part of the Royal Hotel's fabric filled Pedro with excitement. It wasn't just about adding stores, it was about redefining the hotel's legacy. At lunchtime, Pedro called the VIP restaurant and placed a simple order, steak and salad. This time, however, he didn't request Fernanda to deliver his meal. He was acutely aware of how closely people were watching him, especially Marcia. He didn't want to draw attention to the growing feelings he was trying so carefully to keep private. Later that evening, as Pedro returned home, he sought out Selena to share his vision. Finding her in the living room, he explained his plan to bring luxury retail into the Royal Hotel. His excitement was contagious as he described how these additions could elevate the hotel's prestige and profits. Selena listened attentively, her expression softening with pride. "Pedro," she said, her voice warm, "you're thinking ahead in ways that will keep this hotel at the forefront. Go ahead, do what you think is best. Just keep me informed about any steps you plan to take, especially anything that could impact our guests' experience." Pedro nodded. "I will, Mom. If the stores I contacted today decide to go ahead, we'll also need to think about advertising. Even though they'll promote themselves, the Royal Hotel should consider something visible, perhaps on television or other platforms." "Smart thinking," Selena replied. "You've got my full support." Feeling emboldened by his mother's encouragement, Pedro excused himself and headed to his room. But what he really wanted wasn't rest, it was to reach out to Fernanda. After a quick shower, he sat on the edge of his bed, phone in hand, hesitating briefly before dialing her number. "Hello, Fernanda. It's me, Pedro. How are you?" he asked, his tone softer than usual. "Hi, Pedro," Fernanda replied, a hint of surprise in her voice. "I'm fine. How about you? I didn't see you at lunch today." Pedro exhaled, his words measured. "I've been trying not to draw attention to us talking outside of work. I don't mind for myself, but I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position. My priority is protecting you." Fernanda smiled as she read his text, her lips curving in a way she couldn't hide. "I appreciate your thoughtfulness," she responded. Pedro followed up quickly. "But, if you don't mind, could you still bring my breakfast in the mornings? Even if it's brief, it would mean a lot to see you." Fernanda's reply came almost instantly. "No worries, Pedro. I'll be in your office every morning with your breakfast." Relief and gratitude colored his voice as he responded. "Thank you, Fernanda. I appreciate it more than I can say. I'd like to know if you'd have dinner with me later this week." Pedro texted, the simplicity of the question masking the anticipation he felt. The reply came minutes later, and as Pedro read it, his heart sank. "Pedro, I think we shouldn't go out together anymore. Our social class is very different. It wouldn't be appropriate to continue having dinners or attending other events together." He stared at the message, unable to believe what he was reading. Fernanda was the first woman to break through the guarded walls of his heart, the first to awaken something real in him. Her words felt like a sudden coldness enveloping him. He quickly replied, his disbelief evident. "Why are you saying this? I don't care about social class. That's not the kind of person I am." Her response was almost immediate, and Pedro could sense the weight of her emotions in her words. "Even if you don't care, that's your reality, Pedro. My reality has nothing to do with yours. You saw what Marcia did to me. Imagine if she found out we've been going out. She'd make my life unbearable." I don't need that kind of hostility. Pedro gripped his phone tightly, his frustration mounting. He could feel the pain behind her message, the way Marcia's cruelty had left scars deeper than Fernanda was willing to admit. It was at that moment Pedro realized how much Marcia's unchecked ambition poisoned the Royal Hotel. Her presence created a hostile environment where talented, hard-working employees like Fernanda felt stifled and unwelcome. This couldn't continue. He typed back carefully, his heart heavy. Fernanda, I respect how you feel, but I don't agree. Are you saying that people can only fall in love with those on the same social level? It's not that, Pedro, she replied. There's just a big difference between us. Pedro hesitated for a moment before replying. Okay, I'll give you time. Have a good night. Good night, came her reply, short and restrained, yet carrying an unmistakable finality. The next morning, Pedro arrived at his office with a renewed sense of determination. As he mulled over ways to further elevate the Royal Hotel, his thoughts turned to the large, underutilized space next to the building. It was an open area with grass and trees, a blank canvas for something transformative. Pedro envisioned an elegant event space, a dedicated venue for weddings, parties, and conventions. Currently, all conventions were held inside the hotel's existing convention rooms, which often caused logistical headaches for other guests. Crowded elevators, noise, and limited space disrupted the seamless luxury experience the Royal Hotel aimed to offer. Moving such events to an external space would solve these issues while enhancing the hotel's appeal. Later that day, he met with Selena to share his vision. He described the potential of the outdoor space, detailing how it could relieve the pressure on the hotel's internal facilities while creating a beautiful, functional venue for high-end events. Selena listened intently, her expression thoughtful. As Pedro spoke, the door to the room opened, and Marcia stepped inside. She had clearly been listening from the hallway, her face set with a mixture of irritation and smugness. I heard the last part of what you were saying, Pedro, she said sharply. Are you out of your mind? Since you've arrived, all I've seen you do is spend money as if the Royal Hotel already belongs to you. Let me make something very clear, I will not sign off on any of your reckless, absurd plans. You're irresponsible. Pedro turned to face her, his expression calm but resolute. Her words had little impact on his determination. If anything, they solidified his resolve. He would move forward, regardless of Marcia's attempts to undermine him. Selena remained silent, allowing Marcia to spew every bit of venom she had stored up. Marcia's voice filled the room, sharp and scornful. We need to be making money, not spending it, Marcia said, her tone dripping with condescension. Every hotel in the world is cutting down on expenses, and here you are, trying to throw money around like it's endless. Are you out of your mind, Pedro? You weren't born to be a leader. I was born to lead. I'm a businesswoman. Leadership means making tough decisions, knowing when to draw the line, and dealing with subordinates effectively. But you're too busy trying to be everyone's friend, playing the nice guy. How do you expect them to respect you? Do yourself a favor and go back to France. Leave the hard work to me. Throughout Marcia's tirade, both Selena and Pedro remained composed. Pedro's expression was calm, but his silence spoke volumes. Selena, however, had prepared for this moment. Without a word, she reached into her bag and retrieved the financial data she had collected, the records of the Royal Hotel's performance before and after Pedro began working there. The results were undeniable. In just 2 months, the hotel's profit margin had increased by an impressive 30%. Selena handed the folder to Marcia, her tone sharp and authoritative. Have you even taken the time to look at the Royal Hotel's profits over the past 2 months? If not, you're going to do that right now. Marcia hesitated, her bravado momentarily faltering. Mother, I have no idea what you're talking about. The executives were the ones who asked for the emergency meeting. I was merely relaying their concerns. Selena's eyes narrowed. Take a look at the data now. I'll wait to hear whatever excuse you have to offer afterward. Marcia flipped through the pages, her face betraying her shock as she scanned the numbers. The data was irrefutable. Pedro's initiatives were working, and the Royal Hotel was thriving under his leadership. She was cornered, and Selena knew it. I suggest, Selena added, her voice cold and unwavering, that before you call another emergency meeting with the executives, you take the time to thoroughly review the hotel's financial records. That way, you won't end up looking like a fool in front of me or anyone else. Marsha's grip on the folder tightened, but she had no response. The weight of the evidence had silenced her, at least for the moment. Marsha's hands gripped the folder tightly as her eyes scanned the financial data. The stark 30% increase in profits stared back at her, undeniable and irrefutable. Her widened eyes betrayed her surprise, though she quickly tried to mask it with indifference. "I'm waiting, Marsha," Selena said, her tone sharp, her gaze unwavering. "It doesn't take long to notice the difference between the last 2 months and the ones before." Marsha cleared her throat, attempting to regain her composure. "Yes, it's good financial growth for 2 months," she admitted begrudgingly. "But it remains to be seen whether it will continue." Selena leaned back slightly, her expression a mix of disappointment and disdain. "That's all you have to say, Marsha?" Marsha shrugged, avoiding her mother's piercing gaze. "What else should I say, Mother?" "Nothing else," Selena replied coolly. "You never praise anyone. You only enjoy receiving praise yourself." Marsha's lips tightened, but she said nothing more. The tension in the room was palpable as Selena's words hung heavily in the air. The next morning, Fernanda entered Pedro's office with her usual grace, carrying his breakfast tray. She placed it on his desk gently and greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, Pedro. I brought your breakfast." Pedro, seated behind his desk and poring over a stack of contracts, looked up briefly. His expression was distant, his tone clipped. "Good morning, Fernanda. Thanks for bringing my breakfast." The coldness in his response pierced through her. She hesitated for a moment, searching his face for any sign of warmth, but he had already returned to his work, his focus seemingly elsewhere. Gathering herself, she said softly, "Have a good day, Pedro," and turned to leave. Without looking up, he added, "Thanks again." "Have a good day." Fernanda left the office, her heart heavy with confusion. She couldn't understand why Pedro, who had always been so warm and kind, was now so distant. What she didn't know was the depth of Pedro's internal struggle. The pain of his father's abandonment still weighed heavily on him, and her rejection, however unintentional, had reopened those wounds. To Pedro, it felt like yet another door closing in his life. Pedro pushed aside his emotions and focused on his work. He was deep into reviewing contracts when his phone buzzed. Glancing at the caller ID, his focus sharpened. It was the president of PSA. Answering quickly, Pedro's professional demeanor returned as they discussed scheduling a meeting to review the available space for their store at the Royal Hotel. Over the next week, calls began pouring in from the other luxury brands Pedro had contacted, each expressing interest in collaborating with the Royal Hotel. Meetings were swiftly arranged to finalize contracts and iron out the details. Pedro's vision for transforming the hotel into a hub of exclusivity and sophistication was rapidly taking shape. Within weeks, construction began on the new luxury stores. The previously underutilized spaces in the Royal Hotel were coming to life, each corner promising to elevate the hotel's status. Pedro watched as his ideas materialized, his determination driving him forward even as his personal struggles lingered in the background.